Very much for this winter morning. We thank you for the blessings that you've bestowed on us that we're aware of, and especially for the ones that we turn a blind eye to. We thank you for this group of people. We thank you especially this morning for Krakor and his message. We ask that you bless the words that he speaks and bless them directly to our ears and our hearts. We ask these things in Jesus' name.
Amen. Amen. Well, good morning. Are we warm enough? It's cold out there. So, was it like 24 or something? It felt like it anyway.
It'll be warmer later.
Yeah. Okay, so we have been talking about the three major events in the Old Testament that have contributed to mankind's current condition. We talked about the fall and what happened with that. And then last time, we talked about the evil corruption described in Genesis 6. So if you missed it, please go back and listen to the recording because all of this ties together. Yes, Lisa.
How do you get the recording?
I will send you a link.
Okay.
Okay, I'll send you the link. I have a OneDrive share that has all these recordings on them and as a PowerPoint. Sorry, Renee, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. Also, they're up on the YouTube channel if for some reason they have any issues. I do them both in the PowerPoint and the recording.
Huh?
The church YouTube channel?
No, not the church YouTube channel. There's a separate YouTube channel that Renee started.
Okay.
And posting all of these on there. So, okay. So yeah, if I know you've missed the last couple of times, I think so. Last week, okay. So please make sure you go back and listen to that because it all connects. And I'm building one on top of the other. And these are very important to us understanding the overall Bible and also especially the Old Testament. And as it lays down the foundations for the coming of Christ and who he is. So we talked about the evil corruption last time, but we started off by talking about the reminding ourselves about the fall. And as we know from Genesis 3:15, the judgment from God to the serpent was that there will be enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. And we talked about how last time we talked about how the enemy tried to prevent this from happening. Renee, do you have the letting people in?
Yes, yeah, no, I got it. You're good.
So last time we talked about the evil corruption, and we went over the understanding of, again, revisited our understanding of who the sons of God were, and talked about how the enemy actually tried to corrupt human seed to prevent God from bringing about this promise, this fulfillment of his word, this curse that he pronounced over them. And this is the event described in Genesis chapter 6 that is very controversial and often misinterpreted and misunderstood. So again, if you missed it, please go back and read and review that because I go through it in quite a bit of detail. So that was last week. It also explains why the genealogies in the Bible are so significant because God made sure that the human seed leading to Jesus is truly fully human and not corrupted, as was the case with some of the humans living at the time through Genesis chapter 6 story. And it also explains or adds some potential context to some of the bloody wars in the Old Testament. Oops, what happened there? So we talked about 1 Samuel 15, verse 3, where God commanded the destruction, complete, utter annihilation of the Amalekites, including their children and their cattle. I mean, this is pretty extreme, right? And this is an example of what we find in some of these descriptions in the Old Testament. And today we read those words and we think about, well, do we have the same God? Yeah, we absolutely do. We just don't understand the backdrop to these commands and the judgment severity behind them and the reason for that. So again, if you missed last week, I'll say it one last time, please make a point to review that, because it's a very important foundational concept for us to understand. Okay. Today, I want to talk about yet another event in the Old Testament that is often not fully grasped, for lack of a better way to say it. And it is more like a children's story about how we all got our languages today. But it's actually a lot larger and much more significant. That's the story of the Tower of Babel, or Babylon. That's the word. There's a play on words there between Babel and Babylon. We'll look at that later in Genesis chapter 11. So if we can turn to Genesis chapter 11, and let's read the first 9 verses. Who would like to read for us this morning?
I can read if you like.
Yeah, go ahead, Linda. Thank you.
Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower, with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. And the Lord said, "Behold, they are one people, and they have all one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do, and nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of the whole earth, and left off building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth.
Thank you, Renee. The word Babel in Hebrew means confuse or to turn around. And it is also a play on the word for the name of the location, which is Babylon. Okay, so that's an interesting concept to keep in mind. But Renee, can you go back to chapter 10? And those of us who are reading this have your Bibles. Turn to verse 5 in chapter 10, verse 5.
From these, the coastland peoples spread in their lands, each with his own language, by their clans in their nations.
Okay, so first thing, there's a point of confusion here that I want to clarify. How did verse 1 of chapter 11 start?
They had one language.
Can you read that one verse again, please?
Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as the people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there.
Thank you, Renee. They had one language in verse 1, but that's chapter 11, right? Go back to chapter 10, the previous chapter, verse 5 again. And it said, they spread out into their territories by their clans within their nations, each with its own language. So one thing I want to clarify is that one mistake we make today in our Western world mindset and also, it's not just in the West, but when we read the Bible, sometimes people look at the order of the books in the Bible and their chapters as the historical chronology of how things came to be. In other words, Genesis 10 happened before Genesis 11. The book of Genesis happened before Job, for example. But in reality, that is not the case. If you've read the Bible chronologically, you will see this very clearly. There's a lot of overlap. And Job, for example, the book of Job was believed to be around the time of the patriarchs, which means it would fall into Genesis. So, yes, Joyce.
Is there such a Bible then that would have it in chronological order?
I am not aware of one.
There's reading plans.
There are reading plans, yes, but I'm not aware of a Bible that is organized like that. It would be there is a history book that tries to do that, yes, but not an actual Bible because people get confused with that, trying to find verses and passages and all that.
There's a book called The Story, and it's like, it summarizes some of the stories of the Bible, but
Yeah.
it's chronological and it reads like a novel.
So yes, there were attempts, Joyce, for people to do that, but not an actual Bible as such. Okay, so verse 5 in chapter 10 talks about the dispersion. Thanks. Dispersion according to their languages. So that tells us what right off the bat? That chapter 11, the description of the 9 verses we just read in chapter 11 happened when? Before 10:5, right? Sometime before verse 5 of chapter 10. So there is some overlap here. So when we read chapters 10 and 11, we need to think about them as happening kind of interlocked or overlapping each other, with 11 even coming in the beginning of chapter 10. Okay, so there's something like that you need to keep in mind. So this is important, that when we read the Bible in general, not just here, but in general, that we do not think about this as a historical chronology as we progress through the pages of the Old Testament, for example. Yes.
Do we know if anyone kept the original language or if they were all new languages?
I'm sorry, I don't.
Like the original, one that everyone spoke. Do we know if one of the groups,
Oh, if the original language that was spoken is of today, I don't think we do. Yeah, don't think we do. What is possible?
Does having it put in chronological order, like she was asking?
No, she's talking about languages, not the order. So yeah, it's possible to organize it chronologically, as Maria pointed out. There's plans to talk about that. Anyway, when you're reading the Bible, I just wanted to make this point. Keep in mind, it's not chronological as the chapters and verses unfold on its pages, okay? Because some of them are absolutely not. Some books happen before the others. And sometimes, like for example, Chronicles and Kings, they overlap, right? So, or Samuel, they overlap. So there's more descriptions, even in the prophets, the book of Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel, they overlap many times with other parts of the Old Testament. Okay, so where did this occurrence happen that we just read about? Here's a map that I found that highlights it well. Let me put this and activate my laser pointer. Okay. Sorry, Renee, were you saying something?
No, I was just laughing to activate your laser.
Yes, Star Wars terminology. Okay, so we're looking at this as chapters 10 and 11, and this is labeled the Table of the Nations. This is a technical phrase that was put together to describe the birth of the nations and the creation of all these nationalities, for lack of a better way to put it, and the countries and their borders that is described in chapters 10 and 11. And the area of Shinar, verse 1 of chapter 11, is right here. If you can see this on the map, this is the area that is being talked about. And the city of Babylon is right above, right that where my laser dot is. Can you all see this? Okay. So the key location is in that central point, in that circle, and the star is the exact or believed location of where this event in chapter 11, verses 1 through 9 occurred. And the disbursement was right after that, from that point going outward to the rest of the world, so to speak. Any questions, first of all, on this one? Okay. But what is the significance of this story? And we're going to dig into this in a lot of detail today and next week, because we're not going to be able to finish it all today and next week. But I'm going to start by pulling out an interesting note here from the Old Testament, and I have the interlinear Bible here for this section. And what we're seeing is just verses 3 through 7, verses 3 through 7 of chapter 11 in Genesis. And I want to highlight two words for you, just two words here in Hebrew. The first one is the one that's translated in Hebrew, from Hebrew, let us make. And the second one, what's translated from Hebrew, let us confuse. So man starts in verse 3 and says, let us make. This is global humanity, united humanity at the time. They come together and say, let us make bricks for ourselves. And the story goes on, we just read it. And then when God overlooks and sees what's happening, his response was, let us confuse. So both have the plural form of let us. And as we have seen so far, when God is speaking to that in the plural form, who is he addressing? What is he saying? He's addressing his heavenly household, right? His counsel. Just like we saw in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, let us create man in his image. As we saw, this is not referring to the Trinity. This is God talking to the heavenly host. But who's the one who is actually doing the work? It's not the council, it is God. God is the one creating in Genesis 1. And also here, God is the one, if you read through, God is the one who does the work also here, does the action. But I want to look a little bit more at this passage, at these two words here, because even the wording in Hebrew illustrates or demonstrates what is happening here. So let's take the rest of it out and focus just on this so that we can look at this more clearly. The first word, nilbne, nilabna, let us make, nilabna. And the second word, navla. Okay. Does it sound similar to you? But notice something here. Do you see the area, the words, the letters that I have highlighted? Okay, there's a highlight section here and there's a highlight section here. Who notices a difference? Yeah, if you look at it closely, the noon, which occurs at the end, this is really the word right there, and the first letter and the last letter is more grammatical. So the first letter here is let us in Hebrew, okay? And this is the grammatical form of this word, but the real word is what's highlighted, okay? Notice that the last letter in the word is the first letter in the word that God uses. And the first letter in the word is the last letter in the word that God uses. So there is a reversal, a flipping around, a confusion, not just in the action, but in the actual word and pronouncement, which is, significant. Man's plan is reversed by God's response. And that is clearly seen in not just in the action of what God did, but even in the wording that he used.
They both mean let us, or they mean
No, one means
What was the question? Sorry.
do they both mean let us? No.
No.
The first letter of each means let us, okay? But the highlighted section, the highlighted section is the actual word. The first one means let us make. The second one means let us confuse. It's just in Hebrew, when you look at it, it's interesting because the words used demonstrate what is going on here in the event. It is a reversal of the plan of man. So even the letters themselves illustrate the story.
How long did it take you to learn all this? I mean,
So the fall and the Tower of Babel stories have many similarities. And this is another thing that we don't often think about. The fall and the Tower of Babel have many similarities. They are very similar in plot, in vocabulary, and also in theme. They both show, number one, people trying to become like God or equal to God and acting out of sinful pride. We will see how that is the case here shortly with the Tower of Babel. The second point is they both show God punishing people by expelling them out of their homes and dispersing them. So there's a connection here that is linked. There's these three major events, the fall, the evil corruption, and now the Tower of Babel, are linked transparently in the Hebrew. And as you're reading this, it's easy to see how those three actually connect and deliberately do. Now, this rebellion is expressed in 5 ways in those verses that we just read in chapter 11. Now, first of all, have we made the connection in our heads so far that this was a description of a rebellion? Okay, yeah, just let's be clear that that is the case. This was an actual rebellion which God responded to in a very drastic way, So the first point is that this demonstrated the self-focus of people in general. Self-focus. If you even read it in English, you see the word us is repeated 3 times. Ourselves by the people. Ourselves repeated twice. We repeated twice. Pride is at the root of that self-focus. So there's a self-focus, self-centeredness of the people there at the time. The second one, it was an attempt to access the heavens by the people. We think about this and we think, oh, that's ridiculous. That's just, they're not thinking about this like normal. Yeah, they had a different mindset. But in their minds, they were building a tower with its top into the sky. Why? Not just because they wanted to build a tall tower. There's a much bigger reason behind the motive there. One is they wanted to access the heavens, but keep that thought because we're going to come back to it. The third point is self-glorification. Let us make a name for ourselves. Let us make a name for ourselves. So there's an element of self-glory and self-glorification. The fourth point that I want to point out is defiance. Absolute defiance. Someone look up Genesis chapter 9 and read verse 1, please. Genesis 9:1. This is after the flood.
Then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth.
Fill the earth. That was a command that God had given. And it was also a command that was given to Adam. Multiply, right? And fill the earth. And here it's repeated in chapter 9, renewed with Noah, fill the earth. So this was a defiance because it very clearly says in verse 4 of chapter 11, Tom, would you read that for us since you raised your hand earlier?
Oh, okay, sorry.
11:4. Yeah, that's okay. 11:4.
Yes. Then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. Lest
we be dispersed, or so that we are not dispersed over the whole earth. So their motive is the exact opposite of what God actually told them to do. God told them to fill the earth, to spread out, right? But they're saying, no, we don't want that. Let's do a tower so that this doesn't happen. And we are all centralized in one location.
Yes, I didn't want to fill the earth.
Yeah, hold on to that thought. First of all, there's a defiance, right? So keep that in mind. There's a rebellion in progress here. So the first four that we have looked at, self-focus, attempt to access the heavens, self-glorification, defiance, disobedience, rejection of God's command. The fifth point, they were trying to bring God down to earth. And they were trying to replace God's rule by the rule of the gods of Babylon. Now, what they were building, remember when we talked about the one of the foundations that we laid was mountains? Remember when we talked about mountains and high places? This was a while ago. There's a reason I covered this. One of the things they're building, one of the concepts here is that they were actually creating what is known today as a ziggurat. A ziggurat is a structure that kind of looks like the picture there. It looks like a step ladder. If you're a massive giant, you could almost step on one step to the other to get to the top. Or look at it the other way. If you're that giant coming down to earth, you have your steps from the top down. So this structure was considered or perceived as an intersection between heaven and earth. An intersection between heaven and earth. So they built it with the mindset that they will reach heaven and the gods of Babylon will reach earth. So this is a massive rebellion because not only were they trying to rebel against the command, fill the earth, they were also trying to replace God's rule by the rule of the gods of Babylon. This is a point that is often missed in reading this chapter completely. Any questions so far?
Yes, Matei would like to know who were the gods of Babylon.
Good question, Matei, but hold on to that thought because we're coming to it. And we may not be today, but we're coming to it. I don't want to go ahead. But great question. Important to understand, okay, in verse 6, where it talks about, can someone read verse 6 again? 11:6.
Said, if as one people speaking the same language, they have begun to do this, then nothing they can't do will be impossible for them.
If there as one people have begun to do this, nothing they plan will be impossible to them. First of all, this is not God being afraid of what they might do. Okay, so important for us to get our heads clear in that direction. God was not afraid that one day they would become as powerful as God. Right? That's not the case at all. And people who say that basically are flat out wrong and naive. But this actually reflects Genesis 6, verse 6. Let's go back to that. Genesis 6, remember, is the evil corruption that we talked about last week. But let's read verse 6, especially in that chapter.
The Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart.
The Lord regretted that he had made man on earth, and it grieved his heart. This is an expression, a reflection of God's grief over mankind, because unchecked, united, man can achieve unbelievable acts of evil and defiance against God, especially as led by the evil gods of Babylon. And so when God said, let us go and confuse, lest nothing they imagine is impossible for them, he did not want this to occur. Not because he was afraid of it, okay? But important to understand that this was also directly linked to that evil corruption that we talked about last week. How do we know that? How do we know that? Let's go to Genesis 10. Remember, those are overlapping, right? And remember that chapter 11 comes before verse 5 of chapter 10, as we covered. So can someone read verses 8 through 12 of chapter 10? Genesis 10, 8 through 12.
Cush was the father of Nimrod, who became a mighty warrior on the earth. He was the mighty hunter before the Lord. That is why it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The first centers of his kingdom were Babylon, Akkad, and Calneh and Shinar.
Okay. What words are you picking up just from this verse? Babylon and Shinar, right? Where are we right now? We are in Babylon and the land of Shinar, right? Now, there's a link here to Nimrod. Now, who's Nimrod? Our English translations say it's a mighty hunter. Actually, Nimrod is connected to the constellation Orion as the hunter. That's how he's always associated with that constellation, interestingly. But we can easily gloss over these verses. Nimrod's name literally means rebellion. He was in Hebrew called Gibor. He was called Gibor. That's the translation of a mighty hunter or mighty man. Gibor is the exact same word that was used to describe those born of the union of the sons of God and daughters of men. In other words, he was one of the giants.
Could it say next?
I can't hear you. Speak
In
up.
the next verse, it says that he built Nineveh.
Yes,
That's crazy.
yes. So now we're connecting the dots. Do you see how all of this interconnects? Nimrod actually became the ancestor of both Assyria and Babylon. He was the ancestor of both Assyria and Babylon. Babylon is where we are today in this chapter in Genesis 11. And these two nations, Assyria and Babylon, will in the future become Israel's worst enemies. There's a massive reality and truth here that is often glossed over that we cannot miss, because this plays into the rest of all of the Old Testament. It's a very important concept for us to understand, because Nimrod and his descendants essentially tried, later on as we progress into the Old Testament, to disrupt the plan of God's kingship on earth. And it leads into the division of Israel as a people and the establishment of the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom of Israel. All of this interconnects. You know, oftentimes when we read the Bible, it's fragmented and we're not putting all of these things together. All these connections are not there in our head. And I'm trying to make those connections for us so that when we read the Old Testament and the New, it makes more sense, right? The light bulb can come on and say, oh, this is why God said this. This is why God commanded this. This is why this happened here. And without this understanding, which, by the way, was the understanding of the disciples at the time of Jesus, because they had this understanding. It's the mindset of the ancient Hebrews. Today, we don't think about these things. We read the Bible like, oh, let's read this story. Now let's go and read this other story. Oh, let's jump over here and sing a song about it. That's fine, but we need to understand how it all ties together. There is a connection. Any questions so far?
So you're saying that well, I think I knew that, but anyway, that the Bible, not everything is in order.
Correct. Not everything is in order.
So, so something that's in the Old Testament could be written in the New Testament.
No. The New Testament quotes from the Old Testament, and it's based on it. It leads to the New. But I'm talking about the events as they are occurred and described in the Bible. Any question on Nimrod specifically and the connection we are making here with the Tower of Babel? Okay. 3 major consequences. 1, God prevented the potential of a unified, large-scale, and Babylonian gods-led rebellion by confusing the languages of the people. We just saw that. Secondly, as a consequence, God triggered the filling of the earth when the people scattered. This way, he brought mankind back into compliance with his original purpose and his command in Genesis 9:1 to fill the earth. And yet, there is another side to this story. That is the best way for me to explain it, massively significant and mostly unrecognized by modern Christian world today. Without it, we will have gaps in our understanding of the rest of the Old Testament and much of the context that leads into the New Testament. And without it, we won't fully understand why God chose Israel. You know, how many of us have heard the question, why did he choose Israel? I'm going to give you the answer. We won't fully understand why God chose Israel and why he established his covenants with her specifically. We will miss a great deal without this last third point about all the stories we read in the Old Testament and those in the New. We've just scratched the surface here. So what is that last point? We come back next week. Sorry.
Build up, I knew it was coming.
I was so lost in it, I thought you were gonna give it to us right now.
Unfortunately, we don't have time, and I knew we wouldn't have time. So I've already prepared it. The lesson is ready to go, but we have to do it next week.
Go back to that other slide.
This?
Yeah.
This one?
Oh, no, the one
Before that? Any questions?
I just wanted to mention, I was looking it up, because I was looking at this concept of the language tree, and, from my experiences, and I learned in school in the European language tree and how the languages were dispersed. But it says that there's there are 7,139 living human languages distributed in 142 different language families.
That's interesting. Over 7,000 languages among the nations today. That's an interesting point. I wouldn't have guessed that. That's interesting. Wow. And I know the efforts of translating the Bible into all the languages, that's a huge effort. I don't know where we are in that, but that's a thought. Any questions on what we covered today?
I feel like for me, the most interesting verse in 11, 1 through 9 is 6 with that. Behold, there people, this is the only beginning of what they will do. Considering, pre-flood, it was all one language. He's seen it all before, right? No sin is new to man. So I figure God looking at what's going on with the Tower of Babel. Oh, I've seen all this before. This is just the beginning,
That's right. That's exactly right, Tom.
Because it was one language before.
Yeah, absolutely. It was one language up to that point. Yes.
So I feel like he was like, I've seen this episode before.
Here we go again. Right, exactly. And we will go into that in a lot more detail next week. All right, who would like to close us in prayer? Tim, would you? Please, thank you.
Heavenly Father, thank you for this opportunity to get to know your word. Thank you for investing time and loving us in this way, and helping us to understand better your message for us. Lord, I just ask that you watch over us this week and help these ideas and thoughts to ruminate and grow and or boost us bigger understanding. I just ask that you help us this week as we go out and shine your light to other people in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Thank you, Krikor.
Thank you, Krikor.
Thank you very much. God bless you all.
You too.
Amen.
You know what I say?